says live there. It's live now, I think. Okay. Welcome everyone to this audit committee meeting this evening. And we are going to start by taking the apologies. Are there any apologies? No, no apologies. Urgent matters. I haven't received any matters that need to be dealt with urgently, so we skip that. Declaration of interest. Is there anyone who wants to declare any interest?
Other than I'm a member of the pension committee, but it's not a peculiar.
No,
interest,
there
it's
isn't,
just
but it's noted. Thank you. Matters to be considered in private. As you know, item 12, Appendix A contains information that is exempt from disclosure by pursuant to paragraph 3 and 5 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. On agreement of the committee under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the public and press would be excluded from the meeting and the live stream would be stopped if the committee needed to discuss this item. So it's just for clarification. Minutes of the previous meeting, we need to approve them. So they were circulated and I believe you would have read them. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. You want me to sign them?
Yes, please. Back page.
Just the last one. Yeah. 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 Item 6, Treasury Report. You may have noticed due to some clerical error, this report was not circulated. And with consultation with the officers, I have decided I'm proposing to defer it. So we will take that item on the next meeting. It will be circulated well within time and we can discuss that on next meeting. Agreed? Thank you. The next item is annual audit report. And I welcome again to Jonathan from Deloitte, who is here to present the item. Jonathan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I had two things to cover today. The first was to provide an oral update on the audit of the 2021 accounts, and then to also present the pension audit plan for 2022. So if I just give a brief update, we've previously reported on the 2021 audit at previous meetings and presented reports on that for both the council and the pension fund. At the last meeting, we said that there were some matters outstanding, and most notably, we were anticipating new requirements and guidance around the accounting treatment for infrastructure assets. A statutory instrument was issued prior to Christmas and further guidance issued from SIPFA in January regarding the treatment of infrastructure assets that needed to be applied to the 2021 audit. We've worked through a lot of that information and reviewed what the officers have done with regards to corrections and amendments to the accounts around infrastructure. We were waiting for some additional information, which we've recently received, and we're working through that now. There are a small number of other matters that are in progress. One relates to a subsequent event that we, part of our subsequent events review, we look at various things, including whether new information comes to light that's contrary to information that was used in preparation of the accounts. And one example of that is the subsequent year's property valuation for the HRA properties, which showed a difference in value from the 31st of March 2021 and the 1st of April 2021. And as part of our work, we are reviewing, therefore, that subsequent valuation, and that's one of the items that's still in progress. But we're anticipating that being completed shortly. There are a couple of other things around group accounts and capital commitments where we're waiting on some information from officers. And also we identified that there were 2 foundation schools that were not included in the previous valuation. We're just waiting for the updated valuation work from officers on those. Once those are completed, we obviously have to do our final checks and finalise other minor matters, but we'll anticipate completing shortly thereafter. So with regards to 2021, once we receive the additional information that we're waiting for, we would anticipate about 4 to 6 weeks to complete the audit of 2021. Shall I pause there for any questions and move on to the pension audit plan?
No, we can, members, is there any question up to what has been said? Yeah, you can put your mic on, please.
Just one question. Jonathan just mentioned there were few properties were missed out last.
She's speaking to you, sorry.
You missed out, sorry, the few properties were missed out from the valuation. Was there any reason for that?
I'd probably.
If you can switch off your mic, Sarfraz.
I might ask officers' view on that. I mean, from our perspective, it was. I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Why they were missed. We did identify only 2 schools that weren't included when we looked back over the valuation report, but I don't recall the reason they were missing.
So it was based on ownership. So when we went back to the land registry, the ownership and lease arrangements of the schools, the review that had been previously undertaken, so obviously years before, that was in the accounts, and the management review of those assets was that the ownership didn't sit with the council, therefore they weren't valued. This is the first reason that the audit had obviously picked up on these assets, and then subsequently I think they had been presented into the accounts as a historical cost and then hadn't been revalued from there. We are trying to find, and this is the sticking point, is we're trying to find out why they had not been valued and held at historical cost. So we need to find the management review of that from subsequent years. So we're now going back through the years to try and find the management review on that one, and that should resolve the matter.
Is this a material effect of the valuation or just a minor effect of that on the overall accounting of the council?
They are, I believe, they are immaterial. I believe they're around 4 million, I think, for the 2 assets together.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? No? Jonathan, over to you again.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we present our audit plan for the audit of the pension fund for March 2022. I will take the paper as read. I'll highlight some of the key elements. The paper sets out the scope of our audit work. We discuss some of the developments in the year that impact on both the audit and the pension fund. We note that we will obviously follow up on recommendations that we made in the previous audits. We also discuss other matters that have occurred post balance sheet that we'll take into consideration. The body of the report sets out the significant audit risks where we focused more of our time, and the one risk that we've identified here is a presumed risk for all audits, which is the risk of management override of controls. And in addressing that risk, we look at any estimates or judgments applied in preparing the accounts, but we also use data analytics to identify journal entries that may have characteristics of fraud, and then sample test those and test their validity to underlying evidence. And we'll conduct those tests alongside our other procedures for the audit. Within this document, we also draw some attention to other areas of focus. As you would expect, we test the completeness and presentation of investments, the valuation of alternative investments, and the completeness and accuracy of contributions within the accounts. We plan to conduct the audit with materiality of 15.4 million, which is based on 1% of assets, which is a similar basis that we've applied previously. And within the report, we confirm our independence and set out a timetable for our work. and discuss our other responsibilities, for example, with respect to fraud. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? No? I have a question. I believe you are going to leave Ealing by the end of the contract?
Yes, so our final year is the March 23 audit.
Yeah. So have you, you haven't given us any exit plan or any handover plan. Is there any plan to give us that, how you are going to hand over to?
So we will have, we have arrangements in place under the contract. We will communicate with the new auditor, and we will agree a timetable for that and allow them to review our files as well as part of that transition. But first, we do need to complete the audits that we're undertaking. So first the 2021 audit and then 22 before we then move on to the 2023 audit. So there's some time before that transition plan will take place. But we have begun discussions with officers around that, and that has been raised as in a recent management meeting to agree a plan for that.
Thank you. Sarfraz?
Yes, Chair, I was going to ask this question, but at the end. Now, there's another question leading to this is there, may I ask, is there any reason for you to leave this? Or this is just a, yes, I want you to please hear this, please.
Your mic.
So there is authorities, most authorities choose to enter a national procurement exercise with Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited. They run a tender process, and we chose not to tender for that contract, which means that we will exit all of our local authority audits after the March 2023 process. And that was a decision that we took very seriously, looking at our capacity, looking at the circumstances of the sector, and looking at the pricing as well within the tender process, and formed a view overall that we wouldn't submit a bid.
Is it possible I can ask another question, please? Is there any reason of this organization being risky? Because I saw the qualification being discussed last time and you are resigning, or just this is the pure reason what you just explained?
So
Would you hear? No, can you repeat your question near the mic, Sarfraz?
May I ask again, if the reason of your leaving this organization is purely on the basis what you just explained, or because this organization is being risky because of the qualification we discussed last time? And I can see, I've read it, there are lots of concerned areas still there, which is being carried forward from year to years, which has not been resolved. So you're leaving us because of that.
okay. So
Mike.
So our decision to not proceed with a bid for the contract was not specifically related to Ealing at all. It's not a specific choice to exit the audit of Ealing. You know, Ealing was just part of the national exercise. Yes, you're right. There are a number of recommendations and issues and adjustments and things that we've raised in the past. But no, it's not a reflection of that, our decision to end the contract.
Yes, Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. Can I ask for you to ask Mike, are we going to then join another framework with other authorities, or how are we going to get new auditors? Could Mike just tell us briefly?
In essence, I think Jonathan mentioned there's something called the PSAA, which basically does a procurement on our behalf. We came to committee probably preceding most of you, I think, to kind of agree that we would go down that route, which is done, and I think they've announced which which accounting firms are going to do which council. We've got Mazars coming from effectively from the 1st of April, but they don't do the audit till 2024. So we've got them in place, and the handover we've talked about is what Jonathan needs to do.
Thank you, Jonathan. Your report is complete now. If there's no further questions, then we move on to the next item, and that is accounting policies. Emma, you are going to take us through?
So this is the accounting policies that we are presenting today. This is for Audit Committee to note the accounting policies for the determination Council Statement of Accounts for 22-23, so the year that we're about to close, and note any implications of changing in accounting standards for future years as well. I will take the appendix as read, but I would just like to draw your attention to section 4 in the covering report, detailing the amendment to the accounting policies for infrastructure assets. This is from 21-22, and specifically in point 4.7, the depreciation basis of infrastructure assets, which is detailed on page 8 of the accounting policies. And this is the depreciation basis. This could be now subject to change depending on our agreement with Audit and the response from our experts, being the engineers for infrastructure assets. But as far as I'm aware, materially, I believe we're within the life as advised by SIPFA. So that shouldn't change in my view. And in section 5, I draw your attention to section 5, which is the future changes to accounting standards. SIPFA has decided to mandatorily implement IFRS 16. You might have heard that previously. This has been deferred a subsequent year, so now until 24-25. Ealing will not be opting to early adopt. This is just to allow audit approaches to be agreed and to try and avert further delay in our audit by bringing in an early adoption for IFRS 16. If anyone has any questions on the accounting policies.
Any questions? No? So has the committee noted that?
Noted.
Thank you. The next item is Financial Management Code. Emma, if you can brief us on that as well.
Yeah, so this is the report to inform the Audit Committee members of the Financial Management Code self-assessment that we have undertaken. This was first presented last February to the Audit Committee, and this is a subsequent update from last year's self-assessment. Again, I'll take the report in Appendix 1 as read, but just to draw your attention to the areas for improvement. It's quite a positive outlook from our self-assessment, and the subsequent areas for improvement where we have fulfilled the previous areas for improvement are generally around embedding the Financial Management Code and the responsibilities and the standards for within the code with the new strategic leadership team, and then disseminating that down into each of the teams and services within the council. There are no specific risks or areas for improvement that we don't believe that we are not going to achieve within the next year. But this is an annual self-assessment, and the next one will be in the following February, based on this area for improvement. Does anybody have any questions on that?
Any questions? No?
Chair, if I may, it's Tommy, an independent member.
Yes, Tommy.
Hello, thank you for that update, Lee. The areas for improvement, I just wondered if in future iterations we could see a little bit more explanation, because there's a lot of continue to. And it doesn't really give me a flavour of what we've learned and what we think is actually the improvement we're trying to focus on.
Okay, yes, that's noted. I will do
Something a little bit more specific, I think, would be helpful to understand what is it we're actually addressing.
Okay, noted.
Thank you.
Any other question? No? Is that noted? Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is audit investigations update. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. So this is my usual update to show where we are against the internal audit plan. So during the period, we finalised 7 reports, 6 of which received reasonable assurance level, 1 of which received no assurance. That related to the arrangements around council's utilities. And the summary as set out in section 4.5 of that report and the actions to be taken by the council. In terms of overall performance, we're slightly behind where we wanted to be for Q3. As you'll see, there is kind of work in progress. I think everything has now got a committed date, and we're confident we can deliver the plan within the financial year. Moving on to follow-ups. This is an area I've got quite significant concerns about in terms of the number of recommendations that remain outstanding. I've kind of raised this with SLT and actually met twice with them recently as part of trying to ensure that these are addressed. As you'll note, a number of these are due to be completed by the end of March, and we need to we'll need to get an update on those. At SLT, I kind of raised my concerns on that if we don't get traction on some of these, that I will have to flag it as part of my annual opinion. I know external audit have raised concerns on this in the past too. We kind of sat down, rolled our sleeves up and talked through a number of those recommendations. And I think where I didn't feel they weren't getting the traction, they subsequently are. A lot of them relate to the health and safety issues. And actually we've got assurances from management that those are now done. But we don't just take their word for it, we follow it up. So we're actually getting the evidence for those. And I met with the management team on that last week to kind of set out what we need and what they're going to provide, and now turn that over. So we're hoping to get a positive update on those, but there's still more to do. I've requested to go back to the SLT, which is the officer level management team, to basically give them a progress update in the middle of April once we've had the opportunity to ask for the clarifications and get the evidence. And I'm kind of hopeful that would lead to a number of these dropping off. And I discussed with the chair, actually, if that isn't the result, then what we might want to do is ask some of the officers to come along to the meeting and explain the further delays. So kind of not where I want to be, not where we wanted to be, I think, from last meeting. But I kind of feel, having now discussed this at SLT level, that they share my concerns and they're very keen to get a number of these things addressed. I think stuff like the temporary staff policy, they've now set out to do that a bit quicker. I also suggested that if they did some of the compliance checks around recruitment and monitoring of tenure, that would address some of the kind of underlying risks around the absence of the policy. And they said they'd introduce that with immediate effect. So I'm kind of hoping they're now getting the traction on that, and we're talking to them to try and make sure they are addressing that. Moving on to the fraud section, some good progress overall on the reactive and proactive work. As I mentioned, in terms of the performance against targets, we're slightly behind where we wanted to be due to a member of the team being on long-term sick, but they're now back. And we've also recently appointed an additional member of staff, and I think we're quickly getting back on track. So I hope to bring good news in Q4, if not until and if not before next year. So we're in a reasonable position there, I think, in terms of the overall picture. Any questions?
Any questions?
Yes.
Yes, Councillor Khan first and then Councillor Young. Councillor Khan?
Yes, Mike, the question is, during your internal audit, do you pick up lots of mistakes like fraud or any journal entry being put it wrongly? Journal entries.
So we look at all of the key financial systems over a three-year cycle. So we do each of those audits. We don't identify much fraudulent activity on those, and certainly nothing of particular material concern. And in terms of kind of errors and stuff, I mean, we generally look at the controls that were in operation to do their own validations. I mean, obviously, from time to time, you're always going to pick up mistakes. We would flag the controls to make sure there is a review process, authorization process, and those kind of checks to prevent those happening again, and make recommendations where we needed to. So, I mean, our key. Although I'm concerned about a number of areas and we've given low levels of assurance in the last few years, our key financial controls have largely been okay. And we've generally got reasonable assurance in the majority of the key financial system reports. You know, there's always stuff keeps us auditors out in business. But and obviously, if there was any kind of material concerns, we would be raising them here at the committee.
Yes, yes, sure.
Mike, we are doing the internal audit in-house, and the reason of all the transactions coming into external audit is only because our internal control system is being failed somewhere. Otherwise, we would have picked it up, and that will not pass on to the external auditors. Is that right?
So, I mean, the issues that Jonathan's raising aren't necessarily as a result of fundamental control. I mean, so I mean, they make recommendations. We share some of those recommendations, like the reconciliations, and I kind of think there's a difference between what internal audit do and what external audit do, and you know we've got far greater depth of coverage across the piece. I mean, when we talked about the assets, that isn't something that we tend to look at because it's a very year-end process, and it would just repeat what the external auditors did. I've kind of gone round in circles over years of looking at that type of audit, and it would just kind of hinder the process. So that's kind of an area that we don't necessarily look at. We've done stuff in terms of asset identification and those kind of things in the past where it's useful, but I think a couple of assets is not, which aren't material, isn't necessarily an area we'd focus on. So I mean, I take your point, and I think we do identify those areas of concern, but I mean, there isn't, when we talk about qualification, there is not a qualification on the accounts. I think there's not that many material issues that Jonathan's team are addressing that need to be addressed, and the control systems and stuff getting us to that point are, on the whole, we're finding reasonable.
Chair, can I ask a question? Like if our system, internal control system, is working very well, then all the recommendation coming from the external auditors to us is not being acted upon for the last years, for the previous years. Is there any short of staff, or where is the weakness, where we are going wrong?
So I mean, I think
implementing the recommendation of the external auditors.
So we talked about this a little bit last year. So there's I'll kind of cover it off, but Emma, do step in if I'm doing you an injustice. I think what we've seen over the last few years in the kind of production of accounts processes is that they've had a continual audit, There's been delays, there's been COVID and those kind of things. So, you know, we've not signed off the last 2 years accounts yet. And so their team is flat out delivering stuff for the audit work, and they need a bit of thinking time and time to address some of the recommendations. Some of those recommendations are coming in now, and it's kind of after the time they've done the next set of accounts. So it's not that they're not taking it seriously or doing it. It's just that they've got to kind of clear the backlog and get back up to date. So I kind of take your point, and I think we said last time Emma's trying to get a bit of thinking time to clear some of these things, and certainly in terms of kind of interfaces and stuff like that, she's made significant progress on a lot of the material ones, just not quite there yet. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Chair. It's extremely unusual to receive a report with a nil assurance level. In fact, I can't recall one previously. There probably has been one, I just can't recall it. Could you enlarge on the paragraph on the top of page 7, in particular comment as to whether the difficulties arise from a single department within the council?
It's only the second one I've issued since I've been here in the last 6 years. So yeah, it is quite rare. So it's a council-wide thing, but it's run by what was considered the department formerly called Place. I think it's now part of Economy, although as largely as a result of this, they're trying to see if it might sit somewhere better. I mean, I'll give you a couple of kind of the issues which I think we've talked about is the validation of the invoices. So when the team went to say, how do you check the invoices? They went to the supplier to ask them how we should check the invoices, which kind of said, we've not got a process internally to confirm that. We've not validated the properties that we own. So we might be getting, it sounds horrific, doesn't it? But actually, it's quite difficult to log all the utilities against all the properties you have. So there's a risk that we could be paying a utility bill for something that we don't own, or not paying a utility for something that we do own. So there needed to be that kind of reconciliation. And then the final issue was just around the budgets and trying to reflect, obviously, the massive increases in utilities that we've all faced, and making sure that the budgets reflect that. So it's a significant issue. Some of it is quite relatively easily fixed, and they've already brought in an officer to kind of manage and oversee that function. And there's some reconciliation stuff. I mean, as we said, they've agreed it, and they're going to implement everything by the end of June. I think there are kind of some of the measures that are in ahead of that, kind of the budget reset and stuff like that. There just wasn't. We couldn't give it any assurance because the controls just weren't there and in place, as I've kind of described. So it's probably unique in that it's just end to end. We just couldn't give it any assurance. It's all financial based, which I know isn't great given the kind of significant financial pressures we face. But from a kind of materiality perspective, it should be relatively easily fixed as well. And talking to the kind of management team, the stuff in place to try and address that as soon as possible.
Given that, Chair, would it be sensible to have an interim report at our next meeting rather than waiting till Q3?
Sorry, can you repeat, please?
Wondering whether it might be sensible to receive an interim report on progress at our next meeting rather than waiting till Q3.
Well, I have actually discussed that with Mike, and I have asked if he can update me quicker than the Q3. So, Mike, if that can done to all members?
Yep, sure.
Yeah. Most of the implementations were for March, so I thought it would be too far to wait until the next meeting. So I have already asked to update me on that, but that can go to all members.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That will be mid-April, because we'll follow everything up after the end of March and update against those. I'm going to take that to SLT as well, but I'll share that same report with committee.
Thank you. Tommy, you've got a question?
Thank you. Yeah, I share Councillor Young's point about 4.5. I've not seen a no assurance either in my time. And with that said, because it's such an unusual for it to be a no assurance, I would like to have seen much more of a management response. I've got no sense of whether management were aware that this could be the case, whether they were completely caught by surprise by this. I take the point they've agreed the management actions, but I wouldn't expect anything less, to be honest. And Mike, you did say it's a relatively simple fix, which in some ways is encouraging to hear, but equally it's disappointing to hear if it's such a simple fix, why it could be so bad. So that's where I'm a bit unclear just how bad a situation this is and how much of it's just a total black hole that people aren't aware of.
I don't think there was a great deal of awareness until we started raising some of those questions. I think there was an assumption that some of the stuff like the list of properties would be accurate. And that was specifically something that I wanted to pick up, because my experience is that, if you place reliance on these things, you need a mechanism to update that. You can't just expect people to tell you when a building's been sold or purchased. And I was concerned and wanted to try and challenge that. But it's once you've identified that, there is measures that they can put in place that are, as I say, are relatively easy to make sure that moving forward it is updated and they are notified. And like I say, things like just making sure there's adequate information to check that. And like I say, they've appointed somebody to be in there. They understand the measures and that the fact that they actually do need to check that. Been talking to some of the services, because the charges go on to some of those services and they want to see the supporting evidence and do those validations as well. So I guess I would describe it as a rare black hole in terms of the just stuff wasn't happening. And as I say, we've worked very closely with them to come up with the action plan, and there's not a lot of recommendations. It's kind of 1 is check the invoices, 2 is check the property, and 3 is get your budget right. Whereas normally you've got kind of reams of recommendations to get into this kind of no assurance. It's just a kind of small system that just wasn't working, hence the no assurance. Does that answer your question?
It does. I think, Chair, I don't know if you would agree, but if assurance is this, well, it's beyond limited, there's no assurance. When it's at this extreme end, I do wonder whether we should have a more substantive management explanation, not just a reaction, but an explanation as to why it is where it is. What internal audit are telling us are the findings, but I'm not clear why it was in this case, when the solution sounds relatively straightforward. The actions sound like we're just saying do what you should be doing rather than any transformative change. So I think it would be helpful to get that explanation.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I did discuss. I think, Mike, it would be worthwhile getting more clarification on that from the management, because it is something of real concern and worry, and members are quite right. I was not part of the audit committee, but those who were part of the audit committee, they are really concerned that they've never seen this before. So it would be worthwhile getting more clarification. Yeah.
Again, I suppose in the fact it is a rarity, we've kind of not tested the format of the report in these extreme circumstances. But I take your point, and I'll endeavour to kind of give you an update.
Councillor Young, you want to come back? Yes, Councillor Young, you want to come back?
Yes, can I clarify? Is the property terrier accurate or not?
So it's a separate list that was used by the utilities team. So it's not linking back to all the other kind of property lists that the council has, if that's what you're asking.
Isn't that a weakness in itself?
Yes, that's they need to get that to update to make sure that it links into the kind of other property records. And that's one of the issues we raised.
If we found one set of property records which is not terribly accurate, is there a risk that others are inaccurate as well?
So there's reasons why that one particularly isn't, but it is always a risk, and something that we will consider.
That's being checked.
So others are, and others have mechanisms to update them, so they're notified. This service wasn't receiving those and flagging that they weren't getting them. So obviously we've kind of raised that you need to make sure that it's updated and reconciled between the other systems. But it's a valid question, and I'll kind of take that away to make sure that we are thinking about it from the bigger picture point of view. But I think it's a particular risk to them because they were just relying on that being up to date and not doing anything proactively to update it. Whereas the other mechanisms tend, so you've got the accounting stuff, which has mechanisms to make sure it's up to date. We've got stuff for insurance, which we annually update and go to the services for, and those kind of things. So most of us have mechanisms in place to kind of ensure those are up to date, if that makes sense.
Yes, from my experience of the council, it isn't always the case that things are up to date. I do remember us paying an awful lot of car leases when we didn't have the cars, for example. It's
always a risk and stuff that we try and factor into the internal audit plan. And I think, like I say, this is kind of isolated, but you're right to flag that as a broader risk.
Tommy, you want to come back, or this is a legacy hand?
No, come back, please, on a separate point.
Yes.
Mike, on the follow-up actions, I was pleased that you sort of highlighted there's worryingly large number there. I think, is it fair to say quite a large number relate to housing? Even the health and safety ones seem to be housing. I wonder, is there a specific concern in that area portfolio that's coming through for you at all?
So a number of these, so as Tommy, you're probably not as aware as councillors who are close. There's been quite a lot of change and transition in the management team. So I think within housing, the people who were there when these recommendations were made are now no longer there. They've brought in a significant amount of resource to address particularly the health and safety issues. I think when the original action plan was set for this, it was quite ambitious, and to a degree I pushed back myself and said some of these dates were unrealistic, and they settled with September. A new management team and new people came into the organisation and kind of paused the plan, revisited it and reset it. And that's led to stuff now being kind of this March instead of last September, which would have been ideal. So I think if it was the same people, I'd have those concerns, I think.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. And they've had a chance to digest, and they still agree those actions are relevant?
We've also got in the plan, which you'll see in a minute next year, a plan to kind of totally revisit it, to try and make sure that those actions are in place. So I kind of think you're right again to raise that risk, and if it was the same people, I think we've had a lot of changes in the organisation, and I think the changes are bringing about the positive change. I might change my view on that in April, but from what I'm seeing so far in the conversations I've had, I'm kind of hoping it's the end of that kind of era, and we're going to see these actions now brought in.
Thank you. And the new management, they do agree with the actions still being relevant with whatever way forward that they think, because there could be a slight different approach, of course, and some of the actions can sometimes not be as relevant anymore.
So
relevant.
Yeah, so I mean, again, at SLT, we took all of those, all of the actions, not just the housing ones, and we said, you know, come back and challenge it if you don't think it's relevant anymore. And they've all agreed that they remain relevant and the action remains relevant. I generally would be happy if we change the action, as long as we mitigate the original risk. And I do work with management to say, you know, you kind of started off to go down route A and then you found route B was quicker. As long as it's got you to the same place, it doesn't matter. So it's about addressing the risks. So, you know, I think it's all been very positive. And then because we referred ourselves to the housing regulator, to try and make, because we were concerned by these, and they set out a more detailed action plan than, you know, ever an audit would necessarily find, and they've had a bigger plan and monitoring of that project all the way through, and we've just been keeping an eye on the outskirts to make sure that things were progressing. And as I say, we've kind of said, even though we're getting these assurances now, we want to come back and audit that within next year's plan to make sure that these things actually have been addressed, and from a fresh and kind of fresh pair of eyes through the internal audit team to kind of revisit it in its entirety.
Thank you. And one last point, if I may, I think where it says implemented TBC, I'm not sure that's a very ideal status. Is that because of audit's capacity? Is that what we're trying to reflect there? We've not had a chance to get around it.
So essentially, we were told as part of the meetings that they've done it. Like I say, we don't take anybody's word on it. So we said, you were telling us we've done it. We now need the evidence. So it's literally, they need to provide us with the evidence to confirm that, and then we will tick it off. So it's not a capacity. It's largely timing, and we just don't want to confirm anything's been implemented until we've seen the evidence. So we're just waiting on that. But what they've described seems to have put it in place.
I might suggest, I think for our status update, might be helpful if we have it as not yet assessed or not implemented or something other than implemented TBC, because I think if you overturn that, then it just adds to the list further next time, doesn't it?
Easy to understand.
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay. Thank you, Toby. Councillor Kingston, you've got a question.
Obviously, we're doing two types of audit, internal, external. Would it be fair to say, just to differentiate, seems a bit of confusion. Externals looking true and fair value, internals a lot more about procedure. That'd be a fair comment.
I think that's a reasonable summary. We're the light side, they're the dark side, but he probably won't agree with that.
I think external auditors are described as critical friends.
I'm
sure there's other expressions used.
They're just critical.
internal auditors are critical.
Yeah.
Okay, no further questions? Okay, thank you. The next item is the internal audit plan. Mike?
Thank you. So this is the draft internal audit plan for next year. We're gonna start going number blind in a minute with all the different years.
The last item noted. Thank you.
Chair. Each year we set out the plan for the year ahead. We take out a comprehensive program to review, starting with a risk register. We kind of consider risks that might not be on the risk register because they're mitigated. So something like a payroll or a financial system. And then we consider horizon scanning. So talking to colleagues across London, PwC, management to kind of see what's keeping them awake at night. And I think we've also looked at kind of challenges from previous years and the lower assurances. So we've seen a bit more work. I think one of the things that Tommy asked us in a previous meeting was around what are management doing with their own assurances. So we built in something around the kind of what I call the second line of assurance. So how management are getting their assurances from the business to try and ensure some of these things are in place. So we've incorporated something like that. So we kind of listen, it's the eyes and ears and stuff. We also look at stuff that we've done in recent years and try and make sure we've got a reasonable amount of coverage with key financial systems, as we used to call them. We do a coverage over a 3-year program, which is the level of time we link in with external audit that they can place assurance on our work to a degree. So we'll always do those over a 3-year period, although we might do it additionally if there's kind of a change to a key system. I've also included at the very end a 5-year tracker, which is an indicator and flags. It's never intended to be something perfect, but it's something that I find helps me. And I think in the past committee have found it helpful just to kind of see when audits were last done. And it just helps kind of inform some of the conversations I also have with management. The number of times you go in and say, we had that done last year, didn't we? And then you kind of look back and it's 2 or 3 years ago. So it's helpful to kind of explore whether that needs to be done again. So as I say, setting out ultimately on page 104 onwards, the operational internal audit plan, which is the audits that we'll be doing and reporting back to yourselves next financial year. Any questions?
Any question? Are we happy to approve this strategy and plan?
Can I just ask one, please?
Yes, Tommy?
Mike, a lot of it makes sense. Just wondered the logic for the libraries. You got it down as a low risk, but it's there. Wondered why the focus on that as opposed to another medium or a high in the year.
Yeah, it's an area we haven't looked at for a number of years, which to a degree there used to be a bit of cash floating in around, and I don't think there's even that much of that now. But it's just something when we were talking about planning kept coming up. We're doing it as very much kind of spot check, so it'll be a couple of hours at a time, and I just kind of wanted to make sure there isn't lots of cash floating around these organizations now, because it's just where there's cash, there's generally problems. And I think it was just coming from that perspective of the kind of cash handling and stuff that can come from those. So it's very much a quick and dirty review, and just something I think if we're finding there isn't much cash now, and that it's what we kind of expect is most of it's small payments through cards and stuff, and the risk reduces. I think it's something that we won't necessarily pick up again, but it was just that cash handling risk I think that made it slightly higher for me, and just something that I kind of an itch I wanted to scratch. So I wanted to let you know we were doing it too, but it's a very small level of resource just to get that kind of hopefully final bit of assurance on cash within the organisation, that we've not got pockets sitting there that you suddenly find massive amounts in safes and stuff that nobody's done anything about for a period of time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The committee has already agreed to approve this. So we move on to the last and final item, that is risk management update. And as I said earlier, this is a confidential item and will not be live streamed. So Mike will start it, but if there are any questions, that will have to come offline. Mike, you want to brief?
Thank you, Chair. This is the updates to the strategic risk register. So we've highlighted in section 4.3 to 4.5 the key changes to the risk register. As committee will note, we've gone from 16 to 12 risks, and that followed a conversation with SLT and members about the COVID risks. If I did control an F on the risk register, COVID is still mentioned, and I think what we discussed is COVID's there in terms of business as usual activities, trying to kind of manage some of the legacy stuff and pressures that the council faces from it, but the actual risks that were kind of response and recovery were no longer needed to be on there and monitored. So those 4 risks have been removed, but there is bits within the business as usual which will crop in, but very much as business as usual. And then the additional update was that following discussions on the health and safety residual risk, because management feel they've got the measures in place there, and hopeful of that, they've reduced it from 20 to 25 to 20 as the mitigations are in place. And obviously through our audit work, once we've validated that, hopefully that will come down further. Any questions?
The appendix is in your pack. So is there any question? No, thank you. Is that noted by committee? Thank you. So with that, the date of the next meeting is 15th of June, 2023. And we are closing the meeting. Have a very good evening.
Thank you. Bye.